talking today. We are talking about something everybody's talking about, and that is the AI Impact Summit that India is hosting at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. Now, remember, this is an annual global summit, the fourth one in a row, where the world's pioneers in AI technology, scientists, heads of state and government, the CEOs of tech companies, policymakers, startups, enthusiasts, they're all there. They converge every year at this summit to talk threadbare this transformational technology that has got deeply embedded in all our lives and is changing in leaps and bounds. To understand what is going on at this summit, to get a sense of where India is in terms of its policy approach to AI and this AI race that we are seeing countries embark on, I am delighted to be joined by Shashi Shekhar Vempati. He is a technocrat, he's the co founder of AI4India, and he was, of course, the former CEO of Prasar Bharati. Shashi, thank you so much for making time for this conversation in the thick of all the action in Delhi.
Thank you, and very happy to be here, and good to see you in this new avatar, doing your own podcast.
What is it like in Delhi right now when it comes to what is on the agenda? Because this is the fourth consecutive summit that we've had on AI at this scale, at a global scale. We saw it in Paris last year. What's on the Delhi agenda?
Yeah. So if you recall last year when the AI summit was being held in Paris, the focus was on AI action, and there was this kind of deep divide because on the one end of the spectrum you had the United States, which was advocating a very free approach to AI
Yes,
with
yes.
innovation. And then the other end of the extreme, you had
Europe.
Europe, which was very focused on risks and safety, and very pessimistic outlook on AI. And then at that time, the prime minister kind of struck a middle path, saying that we need to balance both these concerns, the innovation angle and the safety and risks angle. And that kind of, I think, laid the ground for what is the AI Impact Summit happening right now in Delhi. And that middle path is pretty much what we've seen how India has evolved. Last year, it was very striking, just the sheer scale of Chinese presence, because a DeepSeek moment had happened.
Yes.
Everyone was asking, when is India's DeepSeek going to come? All the focus
Yeah.
was on China. I
Yeah.
think the manner and the scale in which the AI summit happened in India, where we have not one but three foundational models from three different entities, startups, I think has given a lot of boost, a lot of confidence that India is not behind. Yeah, of course, we may not have invested on the same scale as the US and China, but maybe that is, for all, when all is said and done, was probably the right move. That we took our time, but we are very focused on the kinds of things that would matter to India, be it the language diversity, the frugal nature of innovation, all of those aspects which are relevant not just for India but the entire global south.
I'm going to unpack many of the things you've just said there, but first of all, let us start by giving people an understanding of what is at stake for a country today when it comes to artificial intelligence in the context of the transformational. And I'm using a word which world leaders, including Prime Minister Modi, has been using: civilizational juncture and power of AI technology. In that context, explain to people what is at stake.
Absolutely, I think it's very important to understand that context because AI, the way we know it today, has been around for some time, right?
Yes.
Uh, the inflection point was perhaps somewhere around 2014, 2015, 2016, that time frame, when the semiconductor chips became very powerful. You had very small nanometer chips which would pack billions of transistors. As a result, they could do a lot more computing. So that was the first big shift. The other was cloud computing, ubiquitous access to computing power on the cloud. Right, both those factors came together, and AI started to have that turning point. And I think the most notable point was when the
November
AlphaGo.
23.
Yeah, no, before
Was
that.
it?
So
Acha.
AlphaGo was this program developed by
Mm,
Google DeepMind, and
mm,
it was playing this Chinese game Go, and the computer was able to beat the world champion Lee Sedol, right?
yeah.
And it was able to do that through an approach what is called deep learning. So earlier you had different kinds of AI where you would train it with knowledge, with rules, with expertise, and so on. With deep learning, all you did was you just exposed the computer to a whole bunch of Go games, and it would just observe, understand the patterns, and pick up strategies, and then based on that, develop its own strategy. And that's how. So that was the turning point where the machine beat the world champion, right? Since then, the next turning point, of course, was ChatGPT. So because even the
Actually,
alpha,
Shashi,
yeah,
yeah, for non techies, for the regular layperson, I think Chat GPT's release in November 23 is when every we woke up to it, right?
absolutely. Yeah, that is what I
Insiders
was
and
getting at, right? So the AlphaGo thing was still very much a tech world phenomenon,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But the consumer phenomenon happened the moment ChatGPT hit the wave, because a normal person could interact with AI without any issues, and I think that made a huge difference. And so what you saw since then was this big explosion of people using AI in all forms and manner, and that is where the concern started around what is at stake. Because what if these models, where you could have a natural conversation with, query it on anything under the world, and it starts telling you things, and then you start believing them, taking it for a fact. So all sorts of concerns, because some of these models, when they don't know an answer to something because they've not been trained on that information,
yeah,
they tend to do what is popularly known as hallucination, which is basically,
yes,
it is just and predicting what you probably meant, and in the process it's making up things which are not real, which are not factual. So all of those risks. And in the Indian context, there's another additional risk, which is our diversity, right? Many of our, well, we have 22 official languages, but we have more than 100 languages and dialects. All India Radio creates content in all these 100 languages and dialects, and many of them don't have a digital footprint. There is no publicly available internet information, right? So that nuance, that subtlety is lost. So to preserve that cultural diversity, preserve that traditional knowledge, to ensure there are no biases, and to make sure the models are not giving out information which is not true. So all of those are concerns. The bigger thing which is at stake, which is where perhaps Europe has lost out on the game, is that if you have not built these foundational technologies, you've lost control on the entire stack. And today, that is a reality many countries are looking at, where right from the chip all the way to the applications, if one country or one ecosystem is controlling or dominating, what does that mean for your national interests? Now, normally maybe that is not such a big concern, but what when a crisis hits you? So you can't wait for a crisis to realize that you didn't have control on things which are foundational. So I think that is the bigger stake for a country to build its own capability. Unlike other technologies where the evolution had a certain linear path, or maybe even an accelerated path, the difference with AI is it is an exponential evolution, right? It's almost like the Delta wave during COVID, where the cases just shot up, right? So how do you keep up with an exponential curve? It's very hard, right? And that is where the concern is, that maybe with the other technologies we could catch up. You could take your time and build, but here AI is getting better at an exponential pace, and AI is going to influence AI getting better, which is the other bigger risk, that you
yeah.
could tomorrow design even better chips, even faster chips, and then the models get even more better. So it creates that accelerated exponential virtuous cycle, right? And I think that is the bigger concern, that the gap will be not just deep, it will be structural, perhaps, which you can't bridge.
You talked about the fact that Europe has had taken a cautious approach. America has shot ahead. Now, we had a quote that has ruffled a lot of feathers here in India, right? We had Sri Ram Krishnan, who's the AI advisor to the White House, to President Trump's administration, talk about the American stack and how everything from the chips that they control to the foundational models, to the data sets, to the data centers, to the apps, all of this, the American stack is theirs, and they have invested $600 billion, and everybody, including their allies, including people like India, should now start using that to do tweaks. From the way he spoke, it suggested, you tweak it, you adapt it, but you don't own and you don't work on the core system. Is he being realistic? And are we denying the truth in what he's saying, which is that whether you like it or not, the world, especially, I mean, if you keep China out, is based on the American stack when it comes to
Well,
AI?
it's been the case for now more than 2 decades, right? So I don't think he said anything new. It's just that it's hard to accept that reality, from the Intel chips to the Windows OS to the Google search engine to Yahoo to Gmail. practically WhatsApp, everything is pretty much an American built stack. Unfortunately, that has been the case now for 2 decades, and it has been very hard for homegrown platforms to step up and compete. uh, because the main reason for that is the internet, with its open nature, inherently open nature, has lowered the barriers for someone to build a platform somewhere else and gain a very large consumer base. And India, being the largest democracy, a very large English speaking population, a young population which is digitally savvy, you end up getting hundreds of millions of consumers. Once you hit that threshold, it is impossible, nearly impossible, for, let's say, a Zoho or an Anuradha to catch up and compete with these guys. Now, one example where we got it right was UPI.
Yeah.
UPI, for various historical reasons, is perhaps a excellent example of how we could leverage a DPI stack with the network effects to really give the big tech majors on the payment side a run for their money. Now, can we replicate it in other places? I think that's the challenge. We've got to step up to that challenge. We can't always, look to the West for technology. And I think this requires a cultural shift, a mindset shift. And I would say the government has strangely been far ahead on, bringing about this cultural shift compared to
Than
corporate
the
India
private sector.
than the
Yeah.
private sector. It is unfortunate. It's almost borderline shameful that the private sector has done nothing to invest in R&D. They have this very negative mindset towards innovation, and they just look for the path of least resistance. I understand there are, you have to please the stock market. I understand all of that. I understand there are business considerations, but it doesn't mean you don't have a plan B and a plan C. Tomorrow, a COVID-like crisis hits you. Where will you be? Right? So yeah, that's something I think. So in a sense, I would say he spoke what is reality, but it is a wake up call for us. We can't sit back. And I want to highlight one example, very important example, that in 2016, when this AlphaGo thing happened, China had already made several moves on the AI front. I remember in 2016, Andrew, and who was a professor at Stanford, Chinese origin, he went. I mean, he kind of Chinese diaspora. He went back. I don't think he physically went back, but he created a team within Silicon Valley for Baidu, and a lot of the foundational work on Chinese AI started back then. So China figured out a model where it could lean upon its diaspora to contribute back and invest in these foundational technologies. I think we need to see a similar thing happen in the Indian context, because practically everyone in Silicon Valley was building technologies of Indian origin. So high time they
Right.
gave back to India.
But Shashi, you make this point very clearly, and I'm so glad that you're speaking, without pulling any punches. You're speaking very, very directly and candidly. I appreciate that. But my question to you is it now that we are going to, lean upon Indian diaspora in America? We had the AI mission that was announced, that was a government initiative in 2024. The outlay for a 5-year period was 10,000 crores, which is $1 billion. So look at the scale at which we are approaching this, and you already pointed out that corporate India or the private sector is not holding up its end of the bargain. So where is India going to catch up, and where is it on this race? Because the other word that came about and we are hearing a lot of is sovereign, isn't it? Sovereign AI.
Well, there are two, three aspects to it, right? The India AI outlay has already started to show results, because
Hmm.
they selected these 12 startups. Three of them have already released foundational models. So that process is. Now, that outlay may seem small when we look at the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being talked about globally. But remember, for training models, you don't need those hundreds of billions, which is what DeepSeek proved, right? And which is what our foundational are proving. What you require that hundreds of billions is for inference. That is when you deploy these models and start serving it to consumers at scale at the hundreds of millions. There, our path could be very different. We don't have to take the big tech path. We could take a DPI path. We could take some low footprint models, purpose built models which will run on mobile devices. So there could be multiple ways where we find our own frugal pathway to achieve that. So that is one aspect. Second is India AI mission is only one mission. You have the semiconductor mission, which is also going to fund design
Yeah.
and so on.
Yes,
Then you have this
absolutely.
big thing, RDI, Research and Development Innovation Fund, 1 lakh crore, right? That is the big game changer, because now that money is going to be available to startups to invest patient capital to be invested in deep tech projects. So that will now propel a phase over the next 5 years of a significant R&D and innovation in India.
So you're saying don't look just at the AI mission thing. There are all the other
Other
buckets of
things.
investment that the government of India has earmarked. You talked about semiconductors and chips. At this point of time, we are looking at the fact that these are controlled, these GPUs, and I sorry if I sound very unfamiliar with these terms, but not my territory
Now we
at
are all
all.
learning. We are all learning. So.
That's kind of you. But when you look at all of this and you see Nvidia, you hear about companies like Nvidia. You saw last year what President Trump did. He wanted a 15% cut of their sales to China. America started dictating what kind of chips they could export. They made Nvidia pick up a stake in Intel. My question is, what does it entail to make and create these GPUs and chips, which would be the starting point of any AI effort, isn't it?
Right. So there are two aspects there, right? There is design, and then there is the fabrication of the chips, and
Yeah.
then there is the build out of the infrastructure itself, the
Hmm.
architecture and the
Hmm.
infrastructure build out. Right.
Hmm.
Where does value reside is a very important question, because often in India we don't recognize this very well, especially in the semiconductor context. That if you look at the biggest chip companies in the world, they are what are called fabless chip companies. Qualcomm doesn't have its own manufacturing. Nvidia doesn't have its own manufacturing. Intel, of course, for legacy reasons, has manufacturing, but otherwise, largely it's a fabless design company, right? So what is more important is to have your own chip designs where the intellectual property resides with you,
Right.
and then you can get it manufactured anywhere. Of course, today most of that manufacturing is concentrated in one island, Taiwan, which is a huge supply chain risk. Which is why you're seeing what is happening in the US, where
Yeah.
Nvidia has taken a stake in Intel. We are trying to build our own fabs. They will take time because that's a very specialized domain. Even within that, even if let's say you build the fabs in India, where you can manufacture certain chips, you still need the technology to come to the high end chips, because what is going to come likely right now in the next 3 5 years is chips which are in the 22 or 28 nanometer range. Those are not as sophisticated as the ones that are now being spoken about in the 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer
Right.
size, right? So that is one aspect. Second is, even if we, let's say, we get that high end technology, and even if our fabs are able to do those really small nanometer chips, there is one aspect which is very, very specialized. It is called lithography. And there's only one company in the world which controls that technology. It's called
Wow.
ASML in Netherlands. So there are several such bottlenecks in that supply chain. So it will take time. It won't happen overnight. Even the US is dependent on Taiwan for manufacturing, dependent on ASML for its lithography and so on. Right. So, but if we can get our designs right and we can have our own fabless chips, I think that is a big deal. Just the way Nvidia has built its empire, the way Qualcomm has done in the past. Similarly, there could be fabless chips that can emerge out of India. That opportunity still exists.
What is your assessment of when India is going to be able to do this on the chips front? And then I'll move to some of the foundational models that were just launched at this summit.
Yeah. So on the chip front, I think a lot of interesting work is already happening.
Hmm.
We're already seeing, for example, in the AI summit during the Expo, at the Impact Summit Expo, there were several chip design companies that were showing what work they're doing. Not everyone has figured it out yet, but they're making, they've made a start. They're making good progress. There is one area where I know that India has already built its own chip with a head start over Qualcomm and others, which is in direct to mobile broadcasting (D2M), where Bangalore-based startup earlier called Sankhya Labs, which later got acquired by Tejas Networks, they built their own chip. So there are such green shoots where we have built our own chip. So that is possible. I don't discount it. Of course, this entire space of AI workloads is fast changing, and there is different needs for different kinds of AI, whether you're doing text models, whether you're doing speech models, video models, speech based interactivity. So the requirements can be different. So whoever wants to come up with these chips will have to think through what is the most optimal way to do that. But I think we can get there. Of course, when we come to the higher layers like the infrastructure, that is where you need big investments. And right now, I think the only investments we've seen so far are from the big tech guys like Google and so on. Only now, I think, since yesterday and a couple of days back, you have the Indian companies like Adani and Reliance Jio, and then I think even L&T. They're all trying to now think about how they will build out the infrastructure. The data center policy, I mean, the incentives that were announced in the budget, I think will be
Yeah.
a big boost.
Yeah.
Another interesting angle which has emerged in the recent time, just like what we did with COVID, where not only did we build for India, but we also built for the global south, is something we can do here with compute and data centers, where India becomes the hub for providing shared low cost compute infrastructure to the global south countries.
There were these three sovereign models, foundational models that were launched, Sarvam AI being one, Genie AI being one, and there was some BharatGen
BharatGen,
model,
yes.
BharatGen model as well. Now, these are from the startups. These have been made and put forward by the startup sector. Is that fair to say? And I want to link your answer here to another question, which is, why is private sector, why has corporate India not got into this game of the AI race and AI technology? What is holding them back?
Okay, so I know of two of them very well because BharatGen I'm on the board of
Yeah,
and been mentoring that team very closely.
yeah.
Sarvam, I've known the founding team for some time now. So Sarvam came out of the AI for Bharat efforts at IIT Madras. BharatGen has come out of IIT Bombay with Professor Ganesh and all his research, one of India's top AI researchers. So these are ground up, foundational, totally sovereign efforts, which have been successful thanks to the support that the India AI mission gave them in terms of compute, data sets, access, and so on. Right. Now, why isn't corporate India doing it? What is holding them back? I think it's firstly it is a culture and a mindset issue. Right. If you recall, Infosys, my former employer, after I left, Mr. Vishal Sikka was the CEO at that time. He took a gamble and said, we need to become part of this AI phenomenon. He saw it early enough to put money into OpenAI. But then nothing much happened after that, right? So clearly that cultural change didn't really happen or unfold at Infosys in the time frame that it should have unfolded at. Now you're scrambling to, how do you respond to this whole AI phenomenon? Now you're trying to, tie up with Anthropic and trying to enable developers to use AI tools for coding and so on and so forth. Similarly, there were statements by CEOs of TCS and so on saying, no, India doesn't need to build any models. We are happy just doing use cases, which is fine. But it also means that you're at the mercy of foundational technologies being elsewhere, and you're only doing catch up. You're only reacting or responding. You're not defining the way forward. Now, the argument that comes back is this requires hundreds of billions of dollars, a lot of investment, a lot of risk. Well, hundreds of billions is now, a couple of years back, it was still in the few billions of dollars. And it is understandable that no one Indian IT major could have done it on their own. Fine. Why not come together as a consortium, right? As an industry movement where you could have set aside some funds, all the big majors, and then they could have funded this research. Why not? Right? Just because even OpenAI, when its origins was that, right? It was a whole bunch
Yeah.
of companies coming together. So they could have done that. I think, unfortunately, I guess it's maybe short-sightedness, not enough maybe visionary leadership or bringing people together, variety of factors. But at least now they've woken up to that reality. But to me, what gives me a lot of optimism looking at the AI summit is that we are seeing a new generation of tech companies and tech leaders emerge in India. I think that is a positive because these guys are younger, they perhaps are more foolish, so they're willing to take risks. And because unless you take because our generation, when we were operating at Infosys, I think the culture was very different. It was very risk averse, right? The whole thing was about building the India IT story, which we did great, and the whole new generation has emerged out of that. Now maybe that generation will take the gambles, take the risk, and build this next level of or the next wave of technology firms.
So tell us a little bit about these models that you're familiar with that were launched at the AI summit, and what is it about these ground up efforts that seem to have borne fruit, and is that the way forward then for India given its resource constraints as well?
Right. So if you look at both BharatGen, what BharatGen has built in 12, I think 12 or 17, 12 languages, 17 billion parameter model. Then Sarvam has released a 100 billion and I think a 30 billion parameter model. I think two things stand out in all these models. One is the emphasis on Indian languages and dialects. So they've been trained very deeply in a wide body of Indian language data. Second is the voice nature because everyone's recognized that in India,
Yeah,
if you have to get to the last mile, the common man, you have to have a voice interface.
voice interface. Yeah.
So I think, and then it has to be in, adapt to various accents, various ways in which dialects are spoken, and the noisy ambient conditions because most of the time we are conversing with a reasonably high degree of noise around us.
Mm.
So to be able to interpret and process in natural Indian languages in natural Indian settings, I think is what is unique to these models. Of course, why 30? Why not 100 or why 17? I think uh, these models will have to be purpose built for different applications. You don't need a massive model for everything, right? So depending on the use case, depending on the context, you can fine tune and then have a appropriate model that will be most suited for that application or use case.
So we've been hearing a lot of announcements of these, big American tech companies, well entrenched in the, the leaders or pioneers in the AI space, opening offices here. There's investment in data centers, massive investments. What are the second order effects of these data centers, that we are not perhaps grappling with? Because when you read, you hear about the electricity consumption, the water consumption, and in many parts of America, for instance, local communities don't want these data centers around, but here, Indian states and India as a whole, we are welcoming this with open arms, partly for the investment that they provide, and partly because of the ability to get involved with the AI process.
Yeah, so I think there are multiple second order effects that
Mm,
will likely. I think the first most obvious one is the talent, right? And
mm,
not just with these data centers. It was already happening with the GCCs. It was already happening with a lot of Google DeepMind's engineering was happening in India.
yeah.
Qualcomm's recent 2 nanometer chip, the design, as Minister
Mm,
Vaishnav shared, all of that was happening in India, right? So there's already a great exposure to India's talent pool to cutting edge engineering. So that is, I think, the most obvious second order effect. The second is on what you've spoken about, where let's say you built these massive data centers here. You're also creating employment in specialized things like people who will manage this infrastructure, who will do the electricity, who will do the cooling, who will do all kinds of services around it. So there is that ancillary services sector that will get a boost. Third is of course the sovereign and the fact that data will reside in India. You can
mm.
the data doesn't have to leave India, so that is another aspect. Uh, Now the power and the environmental
Those
concerns
are the
are
positive second order effects. What
yeah.
about the
Yeah, I
cons?
was coming to that. I was coming to that. The electricity and the water thing, those are real issues. There's no doubt about it. On the electricity side, I think given the current shift in India towards renewable energy and green energy, and even after this recent Shakti bill that was approved by Parliament, you're going to potentially see private sector come into the nuclear power. I think that will get addressed to an extent through all of these. Of course, water will be the biggest factor for cooling and all of those reasons, and which is why you will probably see these data centers in areas which are potentially water surplus, like Vizag, for example, again on the coast and so on. So my guess is it will be a combination of these that will play out. But I think the long-term value to India is what I mentioned earlier, where we not only build compute capacity for India, but also for the global south, which then allows us to meaningfully take the India stack to the global south countries who can't build these foundational technologies for themselves, who are wary of the big tech monopoly. The middle path that India has charted is most appropriate because they also have concerns with the China model, which is again very control oriented, very surveillance oriented. So there's a middle path that they can benefit from.
Doesn't India need something that is sovereign, made in India in terms of the app part of it, which is where consumers can actually use, right? Which is why the deep seek moment, which you talked about right in the beginning of this conversation, became a moment to say that, okay, China is here, at this level in the AI race. Does India need that kind of an app based experience offering which allows the general populace to get a sense of where India is in the AI race?
Very good question, because I think that is a good significant challenge for India to build world class, viral in nature consumer product. We haven't had too many of them.
Hmm.
UPI is a consumer
Yeah,
phenomenon. It's not one product. But
yes.
then on the quick commerce side, we've
Hmm,
had some very good
hmm,
success stories to look at. Right on the ride sharing side, you had Ola, which is reasonably
hmm.
comparable to Uber. On the quick commerce side, you have platforms which are carved out their own unique niche. Of course, there's a lot of venture money that is sustaining those models. So that
Yeah.
there is that aspect as well. So it's not easy to build a big consumer success story because
Hmm,
you need to crack the consumer experience. You need to crack the viral economics, the network effects, and you have to be able to have that staying power, because it'll require a lot of upfront investment, and then only once you hit the critical mass, you cross that critical threshold, is when the platform takes off and becomes self-sustaining. There haven't been too many such consumer success stories on the digital side, barring the few examples that I gave. So yes, that is a challenge, and I hope someone rises to that challenge and is able to do it.
Talk to us a little bit about the future employability report that AI for India released in January, because in that I read that in the next 6 to 18 months, India must really figure out how it wants to deal with this AI challenge and AI technology and the way it trickles down across the country.
When we started that exercise, the debate was, how is AI going to impact jobs? And that
Yeah,
question was a very broad question, because it's different age groups, different
yeah.
demographic segments. So we kind of narrowed it down to, let's look at the specific question of
Mm,
how is it impacting entry level jobs and fresh college graduates and so on.
mm,
And that is what led to these several conversations that were conducted with students, with potential employers, faculty, educational institutions, and so on. And the sum total of those conversations is what is reflected in that report. And what we found was that there is a very basic divide in terms of the elite institutions, where people have better access, better tools, and those students are able to get the most out of AI, while you have this vast majority who are mostly accessing AI through their phones, very superficial understanding of what the tool can do, cannot do, and are constrained by various limitations around computing infrastructure, laptops, all of that. So I think that is where the biggest concern is, and then of course there is the related concern around the culture in many of these institutions, where it is the mindset of policing, where students are told not to do this, not to do that. It is very hard to bring about a cultural change. So I think these are things that need to be addressed, and from a policy standpoint, I think the NEP has several elements around these. Perhaps it requires a very focused follow through with the next 12 to 18 months to make sure that each of these are addressed, specifically around access to the devices, bringing about that cultural change in these colleges and institutions, and then building that bridge between the industry and these colleges, so that there is opportunity for internships, mentorship. Students are able to better understand what skills will help them in the job market.
But what about the impact on jobs? That is a conversation, of course, that is not a new one. Ever since AI broke into the public, into the public debate and public conversation, that has been front and center. Is there anything that has changed on, any new development, any new thinking on AI's impact on jobs?
Well, I think one area which is very clearly getting impacted is code generation, software programming.
Yeah.
The maturity that the AI models have achieved in software generation is significant, where probably 80-90% of the job is done by the AI, and then you do the rest.
Mm, mm.
So those jobs are clearly they're going to undergo a change very clearly. The nature of those jobs is going to change. Uh, and that's where the Indian IT industry is clearly seeing that impact, and they're preparing for it. Some functions have already been automated, because there was general automation that was already happening, like testing and quality control and so on. On the flip side, as code generation increases, the cost of software development goes down. It's easier to create a lot more software at a lot less cost, which also means that more and more software will be written, which is very custom in nature. So, which also means consequence of that is the complexity within the enterprise IT systems goes up, because you have more and more custom software, custom agents that everyone's building. So how do you manage that? How do you orchestrate all of that? How do you ensure that you're not creating new complexities, new challenges? You're ensuring that your business processes continue to deliver on whatever are your business goals. So that is going to be the big challenge. So I don't think jobs will vanish. It is just that the nature of those jobs will change. Of course, it's not a linear, predictable path. There will be turbulence, and which is why the IT companies need to do what they're trying to do now, so that they're able to navigate this turbulence and get on the other side.
Right.
Now, other industries, of course, it is too early to say how AI is going to impact every other industry. I think the most obvious one is your industry, the creative industry and the news media and reporting, because by their very nature, these generative AI tools are meant to help with creating content. So I think that's clearly an
Yeah.
area that's getting impacted.
The AI in my industry is not just hazardous to jobs of the people who work in this industry, but it's also hazardous to people who consume what we create,
Of
isn't it?
course,
That
yeah.
that's another conversation. I won't go into that today. But Shashi, must ask you, we did hear about this Galgotia and the borrowed Chinese tech and the Korean drone, and passing that off as some kind of AI lab that they were running, this Galgotia University. What is, I mean, for someone who is a product of India's IIT system, which is lauded all over the world, and all the tech leaders, most of them can trace their lineage back to these IITs. What does it, what do you feel about it? How does one need to see it? It's got a lot of bad press in India, of course, globally as well. It's a wake up call, isn't it, Shashi?
Yeah, it is a wake up call, perhaps maybe not for the reasons that the reporting has largely been around it, but for a
Sure.
slightly different reason.
Hmm.
One is, of course, a lot of technology in India is not home built, right?
Hmm.
Many of the consumer products that we use have components which are sourced from Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, God knows where, right?
Hmm.
So I wouldn't, hold that against in this particular case. Perhaps what was wrong on their part was to not be transparent that we've taken this product from here but we've added these elements and this is what we built, whichever whatever it is that they tried to build. By not communicating clearly, I think that is where they made a mistake. But I think there's a bigger problem, which is perhaps what you're alluding to, which is the institutional integrity and ethics. And I think that is a bigger problem and true of not just certain universities, but I think across many be it corporate businesses and so on. I think there's a larger issue of ethics, and I think in our haste to do jugaad in this, to find frugal pathways and shortcuts, somewhere we've lost out on the importance of ethics. I think it's a deeper societal thing, which needs to be addressed. I don't think you can legislate against it. It is a cultural thing, right? The kind of values that you teach, be it in the engineering schools, the business schools, and the kind of institution that you want to be. Now, we do all these rankings of various institutions, NIRF and so on. Of course, they look at infrastructure, they look at performance and so on. There has to be some ranking around ethics so that institutional integrity also matters. So that if you are sending your child to a certain university, you need to know what kind of culture values exist in that university.
Can I ask you about whether you were stuck in any traffic going up and down? Because that's another bit of the news.
No, I
You know,
think,
so here's the
yeah,
thing.
no,
There is a lot going on here
right,
that is very important. Okay,
right,
and
right,
but a lot of the coverage is about the real trouble it's causing people who are on the roads, the Aam Aadmi, the
right.
public citizens. What is it about India and our elite culture and VIP culture that we need to now put aside? I mean, look at what we are talking about in the in social media, in a lot of, and the international media, very often they're quite happy to talk about these things where India is concerned.
Right.
But it is a reality, some of it is a reality, and we've got to accept that. So is there any thought you have? I mean, you've run Prasar Bharati, you have an understanding of how government works, you've been in Infosys, so you've been at both ends of the spectrum. What is it that we don't get right when it comes to managing and organizing something of this scale?
Yeah, I think clearly the scale and magnitude is something where you have very few precedents to go by, and very few best practices to go by. I think that is one challenge. Though there are big scale events like the India Mobile Congress. You had STIC a few months back. You had Waves earlier in Mumbai, right? So I think what perhaps needs to get institutionalized and maybe repeatable is the best practices and the learnings from all these mega events, so that that experience part is taken care of. Of course, there's something like this was, I think, just the sheer interest level, because the AI has become such a hot topic,
Yeah,
right? If you
yeah.
had framed it as deep machine learning, I'm sure the crowd would not be of the same scale and magnitude, right? So this has attracted, I think, around 4 lakh registrants, right? A lot of students. In fact, the big surge that I noticed, entering and exiting was basically the students. So I would say, take it in stride, because there's a once in a while something of this scale happens, and if so many students could come and see firsthand what
Hmm.
AI is being built, forget everything else. Maybe they didn't understand a word of what was being done there, but it gives them confidence that India is not behind, and the world is changing, and you can have aspirations of being an entrepreneur. You can be a startup. You can actually make a difference. I think that itself is worth this hardship. I wouldn't you know put too much on that. Of course, there can be things can be done better. Maybe more communication. There was a very excellent app that was built for the
Hmm.
registration and finding the schedules and so on. Maybe that app could have been used more creatively to communicate that this time these gates will be closed, this time those gates will be open. This is how you navigate. Maybe the communication, especially on the security configuration, could have been more proactive. I'm sure these lessons will be learned for future events.
Well, I must say, Shashi, I'm happy to be in Bombay and have the benefit of your expertise on this subject and to watch all the great speeches coming out sitting in the comfort of my home and my workspace. But thank you so much for this conversation. And I should have began by saying congratulations on the Padma Shri, but let me
Thank you.
end by saying congratulations on the Padma Shri and thank you for being so clear about India and where it is at on its AI journey. Thank you. I hope we'll keep talking.
Thank you, and very happy to have had this conversation.